Good morning, good day, hello, good evening, wherever you are from. I think most of you that are on the call are probably from Europe, so I think it's safe to say good day, but a very warm welcome to you all, that's for sure. My name is Kjaer, and I'm the CEO of SWOOP Analytics, and I have the exquisite joy of welcoming you to this How to Become an Elite Super Team session for you today. And we have an amazing lineup of presenters to keep you entertained, and an amazing agenda too. So I'm in a moment going to show you who you'll be entertained by for the next hour, which probably also includes yourselves actually, because we would like to make this as interactive as we possibly can, and therefore warmly encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat part of this meeting. I think it's really nice when you're in these sessions that you get to know who's in here as well. So if you can start by just saying who you are or where you work, that would be absolutely fantastic. We are lucky to have Tatiana with us from Microsoft to just say a few welcome words and put a little bit of context of not just the report, but what's important for Microsoft and Microsoft Teams at the moment. And then after that, we'll hand over to our Chief Scientist, Dr. Laurence Lock Lee, and our Director of External Communications and Relationships, Sharon Dawson, to take us through the key findings in the report, a high-level sort of walkthrough and some of the amazing case studies we have. And then, with no further ado, we will introduce you to the #1 team out of 100,000 from Chaucer, and talk about what have they done to earn that coveted position in the overall benchmarking report. And then we'll also hear, especially from David Callaghan from Avvio Reply and Faye from Avvio Reply, about how do you actually get teams to work to your advantage? What are some of those hidden tips and techniques that we can use, and where does that fit in sort of the overall employee experience value proposition? So, and a very exciting session for you today, and I hope you'll really enjoy it. And with that, I should also point out, very important, that we are recording this session today. So you might have seen this little recording thing coming up today. If you don't like that, then just leave this meeting straight away. But we will be publishing this recording. First of all, it'll get out to all the attendees, and then a little bit later, we'll send it out to everyone else. So with those welcoming words, I think, is it safe to me to say I can hand over to Tatiana?
Hello, everyone. Good morning in the UK. We don't have such a nice weather as you do. We'll go through it. So I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about what's important for us at Microsoft these days. So what's happened in the last 18 months has been incredibly disruptive. At Microsoft, we call it the largest human experiment into productivity. But also these forced responses has driven change and amazing progress at speeds never thought possible. And as life starts to return to normal, at least in the UK, it's important we see the opportunity to reinvent work to the benefit of everyone and continue to speed this transformation. So far, I think we can frankly say that we've only been remote working. As we think about the future of work, we at Microsoft see it as hybrid, something we really don't have a good understanding of. And also there is no blueprint way to do this. Like we cannot copy paste the approach. So we do know that hybrid working won't happen by accident. It will need a clear strategy adaptable to cater for the great variety of individual and organizational needs found into the UK workforce. The most challenging part in all of this is to understand and identify individual needs of employees and organizations, to design digital and physical spaces that foster productivity, to provide the technology that empowers progress and reduces complexity. And in order to problem solve for this, in the Modern Work and Security group at Microsoft, we rely on data. Like I work and live and breathe in Microsoft Teams, but I always look into insights. We need actionable insights. We need fact-based advice to make the right decisions for ourselves and our teams. And this is where SWOOP Analytics is playing an important role. The analysis into Microsoft Teams and the effective teamwork that the SWOOP team has just released is extremely valuable. It helps us understand a bit better how top-performing teams are interacting, what are the structures that accelerate cooperation, and how we see an organic shift beyond chat and collaboration, and how the top-performing individuals and teams are already bringing business operations into their teams through extensibility features and everything else we're preparing for Microsoft Teams. This is an incredible opportunity to action these learnings, and I think the SWOOP team will talk more about this. But we want to bring it to the benefit of a productive hybrid workforce, to build upon them with your own examples of top-performing teams, reinvent collaboration, and collectively drive positive societal change. To conclude, I think I'll just want to say a big thank you to the SWOOP team, and we'll continue to look into your research and to let you guide us with more insights and actionable decisions you can give us so we can prepare our products for our customers better.
Brilliant. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Tatiana. Let's hear from Laurie and Sharon what is actually in that report. I put a link in the chat. So those of you that for some strange reason might not have downloaded it yet, this is your chance to go in and grab your copy of it. And I'm sure as Laurie will be talking about it, you'll be even more motivated to get a copy of it. So I hand over to you, Laurie, to take us through the top findings.
Okay, thanks, Kai. Yeah, so our benchmarking, typically we say we run the world's largest studies, but in fact, it's really because we run our benchmarking in a different way to most organisations. We don't survey so much. We actually measure what people actually do. Right? So when we went to the 33 organisations, we looked at nearly 100,000 teams that they had on their sites, more than 320,000 staff that we tracked, and we identified an elite group. I think I've got here 273 super teams, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we got to that later. Over a 3-month period during COVID, so it was a 3-month period up to the end of February. And then from that, we really dived deep into what was happening. Now, I guess, if you're a sports fan, I've been watching a bit of the Euro soccer and the NBA and now the Tour de France, we're just flooded with statistics and what's happening with the teams and so forth. And it always puzzles at me as to why don't we do the same thing with our business teams? So in essence, this is exactly what we've been doing. So the key findings, I guess, the first thing, which maybe doesn't surprise you, but it's certainly the extent surprises us, was that the extent that people really only used the telephony functions that were previously available in Skype for Business, so that's the calls, chats and meetings. Nearly 90% of staff only used telephony. So 28 times as many chat messages as channel messages, and that channel messages are threaded discussions that actually happen in digital teams. So in essence, 90% of the staff weren't actually even operating in a digital team during the period that we analysed. We did hear from our partners that they were finding that chat was actually replacing email, and I guess that's good in a way because we know that people pay more attention to chat than they do to email. But then we also found that of chats, 98% of chat are one-on-one. Right? So if we're just swapping email for one-on-one chat, we might be getting the attention of one individual, but we're hardly sort of sharing what we know much more broadly than email. So that's something to be mindful of as well. We've been monitoring team activities since the beginning of COVID and quite well publicised the growth in Teams usage, and we now know that that's mostly been the telephony. The 7 organisations, the expert consultants that we had operating both as subjects and subject matter experts were unanimous in that whilst the telephony saved us in going into COVID, it actually doesn't add the value that you can get from actually using the Teams channels, because that's when Teams starts to be used as a hub. You can start to bring data in, other applications, the whole digital teaming sort of thing. And so clearly, that's not happening. That's the biggest opportunity we saw out of this report. just some little things from I guess the other dominant sort of story that's coming out of COVID is that people working from home, they appear to be overloaded, weary, and all that sort of stuff. We didn't really find that. So when we started to look at the data, we found that the majority of people weren't actually, totally overloaded with digital interactions. This particular chart is just the chat messages per day frequency, which shows that, over half of the people made between 0 and 10 chat messages a day. So that's not overloading. Of course, right at the other tail end, you can see that there's some that are doing hundreds of chat messages a day. They're obviously busy and probably get a lot of press, but in essence, when we look across the whole cross section, not too busy at all. Then we also looked at the stress more, not so much from the longer hours, because we heard about that, but we're quite interested in this difference between what we call challenge stress and chronic stress. A neuroscientist called Paul Zak is somebody that we've been following, and he's been studying this. And his claim is that when people are working in a trustful environment, that they don't experience the levels of chronic stress than in environments that aren't so trustful. And of course, that's I guess you'd expect that. We simulated that situation, and we measured the reciprocity of interaction. So the people that interact with each other are working inside a trustful sort of situation. We looked at those that had very large networks. In this case, the ones at the top right have interactions of over 400 people, some of them in that 3-month period. And the size of the bubbles are the relative number of interactions. Those ones at the front, at the top right, we actually interviewed some of those, and we found that in fact they weren't chronically stressed. In fact, they were very motivated and challenged by the task at hand. So we would question that, everybody's overloaded with this, digitally overloaded. Of course, some are, and you can see some on the chart here, but we don't think that's the main story. Now, back to the teams. Now, we said that most people are were using the telephony only, but that's not to say they didn't try and use the teams. In fact, that's why there's 100,000 teams that have been created. Some of those are validly not being used right now because they may have been project teams and the project had finished, but the vast majority of them were really what I would call dead teams. Now, just to show you why we think that, this is the sample. If you look at the bar chart in the top left, nearly 100,000 teams that we accessed. Of those 100,000 teams, less than 26,000 actually had any activity in the 3-month period. All right, so there was nearly 74,000 teams that were inactive during the period we looked at. Then we looked at that 26,000 and we said, well, let's look at the ones that are at least meaningfully active. And we set what I thought was a fairly low bar. So they had to have at least 3 active members and they had to be doing at least 1 interaction a day. And when we applied that filter, that 26,000 comes down to less than 3,000. Right, I think it was 2,727 to be precise. So these are the numbers that are meaningfully active. It's still a big number, I might add, because when you're studying that many teams, you're still going to find a good number to study. And then we thought, let's look at the top 10% of those and treat them as if they're the elite team, because what we do at SWOOP is that as part of our benchmarking, we go and actually find out who our algorithms tell us are the best teams or communities in Yammer. And then we go back to the organisations and ask them if we can find out who they are, because of course our benchmarking is done anonymously. We don't know the names of the teams or the members, and they have to go out and find out who these teams are. And often they didn't even know about them in the bigger organisations. And more often than not, they weren't front of mind either. But when they looked at them, in hindsight, they could see why we assessed them so highly. So we had an elite set of 273 teams. Now, if you look at the bar charts at the bottom, you can see the bar chart on the left is actually that short list of 2,700 teams, and you can see that we've classified the teams by types. And the self-directed team is slightly the bigger slice. And then we have single leader teams, we have forums, and we have communities. These are characterized by the algorithms that we've designed. And we did this quite a while ago. They were designed based on research over the last few decades on what makes a high-performing team. And interestingly, when you look at the elite teams, the vast majority of them are performing as self-directed teams. And what we mean by self-directed is that each of the members are connected with each other in a reciprocated way. There's no standout leading leader. And of course, we're finding that with the elite teams, that's by far the biggest sort of percentage. So, having found those elite teams and gone back to the organisations, then we started to interview these teams to find out what made them tick. And Sharon and some of the others on the call will certainly give you more detail on this later on. But in essence, they were operationally focused. They did interact highly intensively. As I said, they're self-directed, typically 3 to 8 members. Now, this is important because there's a lot of teams that are a lot bigger than that. You can't develop the sort of cohesion that we're talking about when you've got, 20, 30, 40 or even bigger teams. So there is a lesson in that on its own. In terms of comparing what we measured this year to last year, which was our first report, the actual number of self-directed teams had actually gone up to close to 40%. So they're up from, less than 20%. So, and a much bigger sample, of course. So we can see that as people were seriously using Teams in lockdown, a lot of them were working out how to use it productively and becoming self-directed teams. But there's still room to improve. So I'll leave it there because we've got some very rich stories to talk about. And I want you to hear those stories. So I'll hand over now to Sharon, who will talk a little bit, or is it Kai or Sharon, talk about some of the really elite teams, in fact, our very best team that we had in our benchmarking. Over to you, Sharon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laurie, and thanks everyone for joining us. But I'm first going to handball back to Kai because he's our CEO, because you have an announcement to make, Kai.
Yes, indeed. So actually, I'm not sure how to spotlight Sarah and Dani at this point, but you can see here, I've actually got I'm not sure whether I can get it up here on the screen. I'm trying to hold this in front of me. This is the real artifact. This is the real award, which is going to be shipped to you, Dani and Sarah. Getting to number 1 out of 100,000 isn't easy, but I have to qualify that a little bit, because as in sports, when you got someone running to the finishing line and they were like 1 millisecond ahead of someone else, it was a very close race between number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Actually, the top 273 were not all that far apart, but you have to find one that is number 1. And that was you. So a huge, if we can all hit the little reaction button and give the warm applause to the Chaucer team, it is quite amazing. For those of you in the call that are in internal communications, you'll be even more excited and delighted to hear that the Chaucer team, the work was done. It was actually by the corporate communications team led by Dani, which makes it a wonderful story. So, but we'll get back to the exact nature of that. And then Sharon, first, tell us some of those other amazing stories that were in the benchmarking report.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Congratulations, Dani and Sarah, and we'll hear all about your team in a moment. But in the benchmarking report, we've actually got 11 case studies in there. So as Laurie said, we get the data, but how do you tell the story just with data? So what we've done is we've gone back to every organisation who had these top performing teams, and we gave them the ID numbers for their teams, and then they shared which teams they were and told us about them. And almost all of the organisations, we'll hear this from Chaucer as well, were quite surprised to find out what their top performing teams are. So it's actually a really important thing for you guys to do within your organisation, because you can highlight and those top performing teams, and perhaps get some teaming champions from those teams that you could use across your organisation, or at least share that story as a best practice example of using Teams. So actually at the end we'd love for you to sign up for a trial of SWOOP, and if you do it in the next month, Laurie's he will actually do this benchmarking for you to see exactly how you compare with these top organisations. So some of the other stories we had in here, there's quite an eclectic mix of organisations in these case studies, and very different stories as well. One of the ones I think that you guys might like is Cricket Australia. So pretend it's either sure. Scotland's still got a cricket team, right? I know England does as well. But they had a great story how they used Teams during the COVID lockdown, for example, and because we had really strict border closures across Australia, the national team, the test team, couldn't train together. So they were actually recording their training sessions in whatever state they were in. They would upload it to Teams, really using Teams as a hub. So they were using Microsoft Stream to upload videos. Then they were using Microsoft Forms all on Teams from the players' mobile devices. And they had to critique each training session, plus critique their teammates' training sessions. And it was a way, and their coaches from around the country were all the specialty coaches were joining in as well. So it was a really great story of how they were using Teams for collaboration in a way that, you know, a different business value to probably one that we're familiar from hearing about. Kai, actually, if you can share in the chat, you may have already done it. We've got a video from Cricket Australia just explaining how they were using it as well. We've got some other great stories in there. For example, New Zealand Post, they set up their team leading up to the Christmas period where they were just this particular team was so sick of getting emails for a report, which was all about how many packages had been delivered each day. So they set up a team, gone were emails, thousands of emails stopped, and everything was done on Teams channels. So when you grab the report, there's so many great stories in there. But let's head over to Dani and Sarah, who were, as Kai and Laurie have said, the #1 team out of the 100,000 that we analysed for this report. So Sarah is from Chaucer. Sarah's the head of knowledge management, and Dani is the head of corporate communications and engagement.
Oh,
so,
and Laurie, can you stop sharing so we get the focus on Dani and Sarah?
Thank you, Laurie. So Dani and Sarah, firstly, can you tell us about, I think you're both on mute at the moment, but can you tell us about your top team, your #1 team, please?
Yes, hi everybody. As you said it, Kai, earlier, it was a bit of a surprise to us. Our top team is actually our internal communications team. So every week we churn out a newsletter in Chaucer, which is called our weekly update. And it's 4 people amongst us who collaborate every week, like a hot newspaper off the press every Friday. It goes out to all company with the hottest news of that week. And yes, we're using that team to churn it out every Friday.
And Dani, this is actually a secondary role for most of you. It's not your primary job, is it?
For me, it is. So I'm the only one in my corporate comms team. The other people, so like Sarah, who's actually into knowledge management, but she supports. And then I have 2 other people who are actually in their day job consultants who work on client side and on projects. So they are doing that in their spare time. So it's not like we can have a editorial meeting where we can all get together and churn it out. We have to make use of the time as and when we have it.
So you're working asynchronously pretty much the whole time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And can you just walk us through, how do you do that in a Teams channel? I know you guys are using channel rather than chat. Can you just explain to us, because this is really the best practice of how to use Teams. Walk us through how it looks day to day for you, please.
Yeah, so Friday, 5 p.m. is our deadline, actually 3 p.m. if we can make it. And from then we work backwards. So on a Wednesday, we call out to the entire company to ask them what news they have for us. One of us, so we are 4 people, one of us then creates a Word document, which is basically the blueprint or the rough draft. And that's stored in Teams. That person shares it then in a post in that channel, linking that file through. So it's easily accessible for everybody, saying, here's the new draft for this week. And everybody just starts dumping their information in there. Whoever then has time goes in and does a little bit of editing or rereading. We're then using comments within that Word document, as well as comments under that thread in that channel to really understand what's going on, who has somebody is missing something, or if I hear something from somebody else, I'll put it in there so that everybody is up to date of what we're gathering. And that's happening from Wednesday all the way through to Friday morning. We're gathering, we're packaging it up. And then once we're happy with whatever it looks like, with the full editing, we then start to think about who has the time to transport it into the software that we're using to actually churn it out. And again, this comes down to who has the time. If I have an important meeting or workshop on a Friday, I use the channel to just add the team in. So making sure that they get the notification saying add the weekly update team. So Sarah, Alex, and Penise get their little message. Anybody able to transform the data into our software, and somebody will always pick that up. And so yeah, that's how it then works. Somebody hits then send, and at the end of it, we celebrate that we got the edition out, and there's lots of love and likes and things like that happening.
That's just an absolutely amazing story, Dani. Now, Sarah, sort of from your perspective, so where do you fit in as a how does it? You sort of one of those, if you like, team members that are not on a Dani CEO authority control. What does it look like for you when you're participating?
Well, it's just as Dani described. So it makes it so much easier that we don't have a set meeting. We don't need a meeting as such to get together and talk through stuff. We can just do that stuff in our own time. You know, when we've got time, then we can quickly go in. We can add in what we found. We can highlight to others and say, actually, you know, I've got a lot of meetings today, so if you can, you know, help take up the slack, then we do that. I mean, I guess from a trust point of view, there's a huge amount of trust between us that, you know, if somebody says they're going to do something, you know, they do it. And it's really nice to be able to put a comment in and say, I've seen this bit, I think it needs a bit of a rewrite. Can somebody help shape it? And somebody does. And so it's great. And I think the at mentioning the team and at mentioning individuals works really well as well, because in my position as you know, kind of head of knowledge management, I work across a lot of teams within the organization. I have many teams, so I really rely on the notifications to kind of see what's going on and to pull my attention in. So, you know, I would say the way that we're working is, yeah, probably one of my favorite teams to be in, if I'm honest.
Sarah, you mentioned just before about the trust, and Katrina asked a question earlier on about this, or just talking about the psychological safety and how mindsets need to change. How did you build up that trust? And especially during COVID lockdowns, I'm assuming that you guys haven't been face to face in a year or so. How do you build up that trust on teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think for me, when so I'm going to give a shout out here to people who've heard of Working Out Loud. I think that's something, so John Stepper and the Working Out Loud movement. So for me, it's the fact that you know, something doesn't need to be perfect, and actually I can get more trust by saying, here's where I am right now, and can somebody help me make it stronger and better? So it's almost leading with, yeah, this is what I need, and kind of leading with the generosity to say, I know that you might be able to help me with this, which is a kind of weird way of positioning that as generosity, but actually it is, because it's giving people the opportunity to show what they know and how they can contribute. So for me, I think that's really helped in shaping how I turn up on Teams and in Yammer. Dani, I don't know if you have another perspective on that.
I think it's exactly that. So I think we led by example to say it's okay to not know things. I know comms is I breathe and live comms, but there are days where I sit down, I have no idea what I'm writing. I know sort of the content that needs to go in there, but it reads really clunky and really badly. And so I then encourage our consultants who might not have comms as their main focus, in fact, one definitely doesn't, to just look at it and say, hey, can you look at it with fresh eyes? And they come back with this beautifully crafted paragraph of short news, and then we celebrate that and we say, well, thank you, that's exactly what I wanted. Just being very overt about what we can and can't do amongst ourselves, and then to pat each other on the back. I think that's a big thing as well. Fridays are so hectic and so stressful, because it's like in any other newspaper, it needs to go out, and the fact that we all pat each other on the back and everybody does their bits and we then say thank you for it, that really helps and has created that trust, I think.
And one of the other things that you were both mentioning, feeling safe and being able to, I guess, experiment and practice, test things, is part of that helped by having a smaller team. Earlier, I think there were some questions in the chat about the 3 to 8 as the best sizes. Is that helpful?
I would think so, yes, because it means, especially with comms, you can, you have 20 people look at it and you have 25 different opinions as what good looks like. So therefore, having a small team is really helpful, and these people and you get to know them really well. It also means that if you add the team in, it's not going out to 30 people and everybody goes, oh, somebody else will do it. It's very much so. If I add the weekly update team, I know 3 other people get the notification and one of them will respond, because we know each other, we got each other's back. So it's that responsibility that might get lost when it's bigger.
Yeah, Sarah. We'll just go through this quickly, but the second top team that you had at Chaucer. So at Chaucer, I think you had 3 or 4 teams in the top 200 of the 100,000 analysed, and the second top one was one for a Veganuary campaign, which was about promoting a vegan lifestyle through January. So what was interesting, I thought about this was a project team that had a start date and a finish date, and it was during the 3-month period that we analysed. So can you tell me a little bit about why a team like that's so successful? And I think a lot of people on the call might be interested how you can get a project team with a definitive timeline and still be so successful.
Yeah, I think so. With that, we have various communities who come together, and they it's very much led by our consultants wanting to do things that support our aims to improve lives. So it's something that they're very passionate about, and so with the Veganuary, I suppose the campaign there, they were using teams to do the work behind the scenes, and using teams to, I think they had a number of posts that they did. They organised a video session, a webinar that they recorded, and then they developed that into a very polished looking video. There was a lot of things that they were doing, and they used teams kind of behind the scenes to work on that. And then they were, when they had their posts ready, then they had their news articles ready, when they had the things that needed to go wider, that was then pushed to SharePoint and Yammer. So the team part of it was kind of the preparation and the behind the scenes work, so very similar to us in a way. And then it was going out to the rest of the company. And in fact, that team is now working on a plastic-free July campaign. So they're back at it again, and they're doing their work, and they're getting us ready to support plastic-free July for the whole of July.
Oh, I love it. Sorry, Laurie, you go.
No, that's fine. I think it was just a great story. And one thing I would say that, this whole trust that you were building and having each other's back was actually a common story found with a number of the leading teams. So that psychological safety was such an important thing for them. But,
there's one thing I probably also, would like to add. What the beauty of that project team was, if whenever new people would come in, it was very easy for them to get up to speed. So if somebody decided halfway through they wanted to join the Veganuary train, they could join. All the files were there, all the communications were there. And I think that made it also very easy for the team who managed it to just say, hey, come on board, you can help. Here is the platform of where you can help and what you can do. Another really great perk.
And another positive with that, Dani, was the fact that these, again, are secondary roles. Like, this is just something that people who are passionate about these issues are doing, you know, as a secondary role to their primary work. Yeah. Sarah, just finally, can you please tell us, you mentioned about Yammer before, and we do Yammer benchmarking as well, and Chaucer the past few years has been one of the top performing Yammer networks. But the big thing is you've got Yammer, you've got Teams. Have you got some guidelines as to when to use Yammer and when to use Teams?
Yes, I do. I think there's a little bit of background noise. Okay. Yeah. So the way I explain it to people is, if you're working in teams, is because you know your team, you know exactly who's in your team, you know what you're doing, you know why you're there, you know what you need to get done. And so Teams is the right place for doing your teamwork. And then if you want to engage the rest of the company, if you want to engage a wider group of people who may want to hear about what you're doing, but, you know, not necessarily kind of get involved and do the work, but they might want to see the output of what you're talking about, then that's where Yammer comes into play. So Yammer is very much open, and as all of the communities that we have in Yammer are open, you know, public communities, open to everybody, so that you know, if you're interested in that particular area, then you can join that community and you can see posts and you can search for posts and you can add and get involved. So what I look for when I'm going on to SWOOP for Yammer is I'll look and see, were any private communities created recently? And if they were, then I'll go and ask them and say, hey, I saw that you've created this private community. What's that about? What are you looking to achieve there? And then it might be that I suggest that maybe if it's for teamwork, that maybe a team is more appropriate rather than having the private community within Yammer. So I think trying to make that that distinction really clear and easy to people, so that, you know, Teams is for teamwork and Yammer is for, you know, engaging them much more widely.
Yeah, fantastic guidelines. Thank you for sharing that. And Sarah, you've also agreed to share your SWOOP for Teams dashboard. And the reason we wanted to show you this is Sarah's actually showing the real data from Dani and Sarah's team, which was our #1 team. And what I'm going to ask you, Kjaer, if you could jump in here and just go through to explain to everybody what measurements to look for when you want to find those high-performing teams. What should we really be focusing on?
Sure. So with a bit of luck, we're really testing the technology out here. We're going to get Sarah to share her screen, and look at that, it's all coming up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yay. Yeah, we can see it. So we've gone back to the time period around the time when we actually did the analysis. So you can see the date range says the 1st of December 2020 to 28th of February. And this is indeed the weekly. This is the #1 team. And when we look at these high-performing teams, as Laura was talking about, these they have a set of, I guess, common traits among them. If you look at the number of members here, there were 4. So I think Laura mentioned between 3 and 8. Yeah, it's really hard to have these very highly reciprocated connections once the team starts to grow. So it's 4 people. You'll see over on the right-hand side, this has been called out automatically as what's called a self-directed team. And you can see that little iconic representation there of the black circles and the lines between them. That represents it. We automatically detect this based on the interaction patterns. So the team can go in and see what style of team they are. And we can see that even one of the metrics, it says a key player dependency. It just reports on whether or not they rely on a single person, and they don't. Like this is one of those where Dani and Sarah were saying they just all work seamlessly together. It's really like a total embedded network. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the two-way relationships. You'll see that. So in the middle column there, it says two-way relationships, 100%. It's just phenomenal. You know, that's when everyone interacts with everyone. It doesn't have to be 100% to make it like a #1 out of 100,000, but it needs to be very high. And that's the problem. In some of the chat we talked about, you know, I think it was Katrina that was saying that, you know, like sometimes these teams get very big. And this is where you start to see an impact on that two-way relationships, because once we have 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people in the team, it's just really hard to get to know everyone. And the moment you don't feel you know everyone, there's no psychological safety. And then that's when we say, oh, I'm just going to chat to Sarah about this. I'm just going to hop over and chat and do this because the other people, the other 48, I don't really know. And that's where this thing starts to sort of fall down. And that's, I think it's one of the reasons why we're seeing so much happening in chat. It's simply because these teams grow too big, and we need to sort of, you know, to really have these teams that really need to operate at a high level of collaborative output. You need to have high level of trust, and you really need to think about who's in the team and not inviting someone just because, oh, you know, Laurie, he's sort of the chief scientist, we ought to invite him in. And Laurie is very enthusiastic about inviting in, and he doesn't like saying I shouldn't be here. So the team just grows and grows. So anyway, just a couple of metrics. If we scroll down just a tiny little bit more on the screen, some other things that shows you that this is just one of those high velocity teams. The response rate over on the right hand side, like 81%, you know, replies to a post. Just imagine what it feels like. You go and you post, bang, you get a reply. In this case, 71% of those comes within an hour. Boom, you know. If we worked across multiple time zones, of course, you'd set your expectations accordingly. So this is a really nice way for you to have a conversation with your team and say, well, you know, you can use this data to agree team protocols. How are we supposed to be working together? You know, and like, can we ensure that we don't just invite people in? Do we have sort of an agreement that when someone posts something, we're using the @mention the team, and then we respond? And I think the problem, once the team grows, then everyone is thinking that someone else will respond. But what Dani and Sarah has got, they've got this real high trust team. And you know, when you're calling someone out, we need help, and boom, you get the answer straight away. So really good. And the last two things I'll talk about is the mention and the curiosity index. This good practice of mentioning. So we calculate that how often a team is using the mentioning feature. So you can see here that 26% of posts have a mention in them, and we actually have some. There's a little goal target in there, and Sarah, if you could just hover over that goal. We actually put that in a global benchmarking of what we think you should be able to achieve. And we're not saying it's right, and like it's not like for everywhere, but it's, you know, it's like the Fitbit 10,000 steps per day. You know, if you don't know anything else, then try to aim for that, unless you have an agreement that you just on this all the time, you don't have to mention each other. But, you know, Sarah and Dani, they're killing it here, you know, with 26%. The curiosity index on the far left reports on how often we ask questions. And, you know, in teams with high level of trust, we're not afraid of asking questions. You know, in teams with low level of trust, we just do lots of updates, but we don't ask questions because questions is a sign of weakness. So, you know, again here, the global sort of average, we can see those really high performing teams takes us up in the 20%. And again, you can see why Dani and Sarah's the weekly update made it to #1. You're just nailing it on all metrics. So if you ever want a case study and you know, someone to point to and say that's the kind of working style we want to replicate, this is the team to have a look at. So thank you so much, Dani and Sarah, for sharing these numbers with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Dani and Sarah, thank you so much. And everyone, please keep your questions, or you can ask them in the chat now, but we'll have some time to be able to ask Sarah and Dani more questions. But we're going to move on now to our team's experts. So we're lucky enough to be joined today by Faye Briscoe, who's from Avvio Reply. She's the Senior Account Director, and we've got David Callaghan from WM Reply, and he's the Business Unit Manager and ACM lead. Thank you so much, Faye and David, for joining us. You've probably, I'm sure you've been following the chat the whole way, but there's been lots of questions about culture, psychological safety, those sorts of things. I'm guessing this is something that, you know, this isn't the first time you've had these sorts of questions. What are some of your tips? I mean, we've had some fabulous examples from Dani and Sarah, but what are some of your tips for being able to create that safe place where you can work and then start to get productive work from teams?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think, I mean, I think the first thing that we all need to give ourselves a break over is the fact that COVID happened overnight, and there was a mad rush to find the right digital tools that we could get out to the business super quickly to just allow us to be able to function. Obviously, now that we have moved into this rhythm of this new hybrid world of work and Teams is here to stay, I think it is absolutely super important to take a stop and review where we are with Teams and actually where our company culture is sitting, and especially looking at that psychological safety. And the first thing that I think you would need to do is really spend some time understanding the needs of your employees, utilising both the really rich analytics that you can get from platforms like the SWOOP platform, speaking to your employees and understanding actually where those pain points, barriers, mindsets and behaviours are, and then start to formulate an employee experience to improve that. Because actually the last thing that we want on Teams is for it to be the new email. And I'm sure you'll remember, 12 months ago, it was like, email was this everyone, we all hated it, didn't we? It was like constant, and that actually we don't want that to happen with Teams. And I think what's really interesting that's come out of this SWOOP report is actually the fact that Teams is really being used for those chats, those video calls, those meetings. So it's kind of doing the next stage function of email, but what it's not doing, or what organizations and companies aren't doing at the moment, is really understanding the opportunity around Teams to really deliver that hybrid model of work and a successful employee experience. And I think the way that you can look to do that, so as I said before, is really look at those employee needs, be really clear on your channel strategy as well. So understand, you need to understand what is the purpose and the point of Teams. If you've got Yammer or Workplace in place, when and where do you use that? Email, Microsoft Planner, I mean the whole Office 365 suite. Understand the role of those, and then actually be really, really clear to your employees of when to be using those, so to communicate the purpose to them as well. And then finally, I think the thing that I would talk around is that, I don't think that everyone has a really great understanding of the volume of functionality that's available on Teams to actually make it a really valuable tool for employees. And actually within my organisation, yeah, absolutely, okay, I'll put my hands up and say I am naughty. I do spend a lot of time in chat, and actually, what's been great about this webinar is it's really educated me more to make sure that those conversations do happen in channels. But actually, we use it for holiday planners. We use it to benchmark important bits of content and information. We use it to manage our finances. So actually, for me, it is a super valuable tool. And then what we then do is that when we then understand what functionality is working for us, we then spread that throughout our company or our organisation so that everyone else can start using it and we can start modelling those behaviours. Oh, Sharon,
Sharon, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. In the report, I think it's page 66 when you have a look. We've actually got 5 tips. So we spoke to your colleagues and other partners around the world, and we have 5 tips for implementing Teams, or things you should definitely avoid when you are rolling out Teams. And Faye, it's interesting. One of those was actually don't get rid of the functions. Teams is such a hub when it is used properly, and all these different apps, like you mentioned Planner before, Yammer and everything, allow people access to these things. Yes, it can be overwhelming to start with, but if they can't access them, they'll probably go outside of Teams or even outside of the Microsoft 365 suite, bring other tools, and it just becomes quite chaotic. Is that advice that you guys would follow, David, as well?
I think it's an interesting point, because absolutely. The biggest question that we get when it comes to Teams, when it comes to adoption, it's what tool when. We're giving people a plethora of platforms, and some of them do the same thing, right? Planner is very similar to a project, which is similar to something else. So it all starts by taking a step back and thinking about how people work. How are our people working? Can we really actually answer the question truly that we know how people in the organization work, what their pain points are, what are the opportunities for them in using Teams? So we need to do that discovery. We need to really understand what it is and how the tools can start to help us. And then, as Faye was just saying, that allows us to start to think about, right, these tools, these wonderful tools, how can they start to help our people? What is Teams going to be used for? How are we going to position that? What is Yammer's purpose going to be? And that starts to really help us understand, helping people. Thinking back to last year, we were working with an organization, a global company, over 100,000 seats. And for them, they were still using Skype. But they got to over 50% adoption of Teams across the globe in just collaboration only mode, which goes against the grain a little bit about what we've been talking about. But it just shows that it's possible that positioning Teams as that collaboration hub, yes, chatting to people, talking out loud, working in groups, working on documents together is a really fundamental thing. And then all the meeting stuff, it just really helps it. And yeah, we need to turn off those old tools. We need to stop that bad way of working. We need to remove some things maybe in the process, which I think is, part of the report and part of the recommendations. We need to turn off all these tools, because if we're giving people, I don't know, Zoom and Teams and Skype still hanging around, and maybe they're joining a Slack channel because that's a client they're working with or something like that, it all becomes a bit manic, chaotic. And so, yeah, it's been spoken about as well. We default to that psychological safety, which is, okay, I need to talk to just Faye and Sharon. I'm going to send them a chat message because I then am reassured that it's only them that are going to see that message. And that goes back to email culture, which, Faye also mentioned. It's about stepping away from that and actually starting to work out loud. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's been mentioned in the chat. It's been mentioned by several people already. It's culture. And that's how we start to really change things. So yeah, move off Skype if you haven't already. Time's running out. But then start to think about the next phase of that. So move to Teams, start to adopt it in its grassroots, and then start to challenge people in how they're working, which then starts to deliver that big word that we all love, which is digital transformation, because it's all about wider work, the modern workplace, and how we start to deliver those results.
Can I just, David, there was a question from Simon that was about, and maybe it's both, actually, it's probably a combination of Faye and David and Laurence to answer this. Simon was asking whether there was anything in the benchmarking report about, senior leaders and the role modeling. Do we need role modeling? So I guess there's something to Laurie about, is that in the report, but there's also something to Faye and David. What do we do when we have these managers that keep on sending emails? And how do we? I'm not sure who wants to have a first go. I should just ask Simon. Did I get the question sort of roughly right? You're welcome to unmute. But I hope I got the question right.
He's given us a thumbs up.
Yeah,
okay.
It's interesting that what we often say is that in Yammer, it's important for the senior leaders to lead the way. On Teams, it's not necessarily the case. In fact, what we found is that the people leading the way were often not the management team. We had one example, Real Foundations, where the top strategy team was a strong team, but all the others were operational level. And I think that's where the inspiration comes from, and that's what we've heard from our subject matter leaders as well. That model your work on people doing work now. If the management leaders are bad, they're not going to get better all of a sudden overnight. We found that the best practices were people worked it out. People worked it out themselves, and in fact, that's why they were hidden, because they were just getting on and doing their work. So for Teams, I think the role model are people actually on the job doing the job today, not so much the leaders. So don't look there. So you won't find anything.
And I think when you tap I was going to say, can you tap into that with champions?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where I was about to lead is, you know, I think, you know, team champions are absolutely as crucial as any ambassadors, advocates and champions that you have within your business. And I think as Laurence was saying, you know, a lot of the time, the people who are advocates for teams are frontline, grassroots, the employees that sit below those, the employees that sit below line managers. So what we need to be doing is creating that Teams Champions network and facilitating them to amplify best practice, good behaviours, information and knowledge sharing. And we need to ensure that we're keeping that community ongoing as well, because I think, you know, as we said to say, Teams is here to stay. So therefore, a community of Teams champions is absolutely crucial in driving this forward as a successful tool.
Yeah, and you know, just to add to that, I mean, Simon and I can spend an hour talking about this topic. I quite regularly do when I'm working with kind of organisations. It's, you know, ProCi, if you've not heard of them, they do a benchmarking report every 2 years on change management and adoption. Their biggest thing is, you know, active and visible senior sponsorship and leadership is what delivers change. If you do not have change, then you're not going to deliver your results, because it's all about how people get managed through that process, which sounds horrible, but is a necessity. But it's not just about our champions and our leaders, it's about our influencers. Who are those people across the organization that can start to actually deliver results by influencing others? You know, the way that we get execs, you know, people that have insane calendars and diaries to actually start to use Teams, is we don't necessarily go to them first. We go to their PA, we go to their support team, and we work with them. We just show them Teams, we work out the art of the possible, and then we coach those senior leaders in much smaller, broken down sessions, showing them how it works for them. And it's a very open conversation. You know, they've got 100 things on their plate. How does Teams start to support them? And that's where they become more active and visible. Because if senior leaders are sending out an email or issuing work or communicating with their teams, then how can we expect our people to start to use Teams to actually make that happen? So therefore, you get your grassroots with your champions, you've got your senior leaders coming in from the top, and that's where we meet people in the middle, and that's where change starts to flourish across the organization.
Well, I hope that's where SWOOP can come into play. Laurie, do you want to screen share the QR code if anyone does want to set up a trial? Because David and Faye, that's where, you know, we can show you immediately who are those influencers, who are those champions, so you can use them across your network to try to really boost that collaboration, that engagement really quickly. Laurie's just going to actually share on here. We've got a QR code. Oh, wait, let's go back to your tips. Anyway, here's a QR code for this one's for the report, and the next one is, if you would like, Laurie, could you explain what you're going to do for the next month for anyone who wants a free trial?
Yeah, this is even not even on the press to get hot yet, but what we've discovered is that the people that we've talked to, the organisations, really weren't aware of who their best teams were, and they were so grateful when they got to find out who they were and what they were doing, because the people we're talking to were generally responsible for the rollout and adoption of Teams and demonstrating value and so forth. So what we wanted to do was to provide that opportunity to other organisations that maybe weren't in our benchmarking study. All it takes is that if you do trial SWOOP, we give you a 2-week trial, but in that time, we can pick up, you know, I think it's about a year. Kai, you might be able to correct me, about a year's worth of historical data as well. So we can look at your teams over an extended period and do the same sort of thing, find out which ones are your high performing ones. And as Sharon said, we don't know what their names are or what have you. So we'll get back to you and we'll tell you the IDs, and you'll get a list of who your high performing teams are. And hopefully you'll find the same sorts of things that we've found with our benchmarking partners. And in fact, we found that, you know, like of the 33 organisations, I think 3/4 of them had a team, at least one team in the top 1%. All right, and this is something we find quite commonly, even with our Yammer benchmarking. You know, you might find as an organisation, you might think that you're not really that mature at all, but you'd be surprised. There are people in your organisation that have worked it out. You know, they may have not had support or training, but because they're motivated to be a strong team, they've just worked out what you need to do. So these are gems. So we want people to find those teams. So if you sign up for a trial, we'll commit to giving you a report, if you like, on what your top teams are, and in fact how they compare against the teams that we've already identified as elite teams, and that'll give you a great start for how you can start to promulgate the sort of the practices that are actually happening inside your own organisation today.
Thank you, Laurie. Really appreciate it. We are right on the hour, so thank you very much to all of you for attending.